Tonight, our main speaker is Kathy. Help me welcome Kathy to the stage.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kathy, and I am an alcoholic. And I grew up in Waynesville, Asheville area of North Carolina. My drinking started out as a teenager, pretty much just drinking on the weekends. When I graduated from high school, I made a decision to move to Florida. I had two sisters and a brother who lived in Florida. I did come from an alcoholic family on both sides of my family, and I always walked on eggshells in my home. When my parents fought, my mother would get the gun out and put it on the table. It was that kind of, we were country people, we were hillbillies. And so at the age of 19, I moved to South Florida. And in North Carolina, I lived in a dry county where if you drank, we used to go to the hood and do shots in this lady's basement, and her name was Honeybee. And we'd go there and do shots because there was no booze to be found. And the first thing that I did before alcohol was cigarettes, and then it was alcohol, and then it was weed. And so by the time I was 19, I moved to South Florida, and when I moved to South Florida, there were lots of other dry goods that you didn't get in North Carolina. So I want to say at that time, the drinking age in South Florida was 18, so I really felt like I had died and gone to heaven. I'd never been able to hang out in bars and because we just didn't have that. There, if you could drive over to Asheville, but you weren't getting into a bar there. So I really thought, that this is what it was all about. And I had my older sister when I moved there. I said, "Well, can I live with you?" And she said, "Yeah, but you're going to need to get a job." Well, I got a job, of course, in the restaurant, work in restaurants, and that was just one big party. And so from 20 to 26, that's what I did. I did coke and drank, and I loved to do coke because I could drink more. I could be really, really wasted, and it would tighten coke. I could get an 8-ball, and it would be I could tighten up, and I just keep on drinking. And that was my life, and when I got to AA, I really thought life was over. I really thought I'd never have fun again because that was really all I knew. All I looked forward to was the weekends, and I worked a Monday through Friday job, and I couldn't wait for the weekend to get there. The same sister that I had moved in with, I OD'd on coke when I was 26 years old, and the paramedics came, and that older sister came, and she was going to move in with me and help me get my life together and just make everything different. And so she went out on a Sunday morning to get paint to paint the apartment, and by 10 o'clock she comes back, and here I am, and I'm just totally shit-faced. And she's like, how do you do this? No one even sells alcohol on Sunday morning. Well, when you're an alcoholic, you know where to go on Sunday morning. You know where to go take the edge off. And so she had a friend who was an alcoholic, but he had never shared that with her. And when she came home and I was just totally drunk, she was crying because she was more like a mother figure. She was 15 years older than me. And he said to her, he goes, I can't help your sister, but I can take her where she can get help. And that's where my journey began. Is he took me I came from a very heavily AA area in South Florida, Boca Raton, Delray Beach. And he took me to my first AA meeting at the Boca Raton Hospital, and I came home and said, "What is wrong with you?" Those people talked about hiding their bottles in their toilets, in the back of their toilets. I go, "I've never hid my booze." And she said, "Kathy, you live alone. Who would you even have to hide your booze from? And I was pretty much, in the end, I was pretty much that same kind of drinker that Jenna described. I just wanted to get my booze and go home and drink. I got around AA. That doesn't work. That just does not work. I guess I had a fantasy that if I married someone in AA, surely I would stay sober. I was a chronic relapser. I had 2 years 3 times, then I had 6 years, then I had 3 years, and my sobriety date today is March 26, 2003. So basically it took me 16 years to get 16 years. I married a man in AA. I had a huge AA wedding, and kind of like Christmas or holidays or big things that you're celebrating, after the wedding was over, my husband came home from work, and I was writing thank you notes, only I was down on the table like this writing them. And he was like, oh my God. And by that time, I had found solid alcohol, which was Xanax. And I liked that because Tom couldn't smell it. But he could see it. So he got with my sponsor. You know, I picked up, we pick up white chips, or our surrender chips in South Florida. So I started over again, and finally, we had 2 kids. I can vividly remember down there, our Walgreens and the liquor store is connected, but there's an inside door. So I take my boys, I would always make sure I got 2 large bottles of vodka or either 2 gallons of wine. Because I didn't want to be one of those mothers that drove around drunk with their kids. And my husband traveled. I'd stay sober forever, but then when he went away, because I had never surrendered, I had kind of always, my husband was very, very involved in AA, so I kind of walked around in his shadow with this, I was passive aggressive with this little tiny voice that said, hi, I'm Tom's wife. But did I clean, back then we smoked in meetings, did I clean ashtrays, did I do any of that? At times I would do that to make it look like I was, actually had joined AA and surrendered. But, you know, obviously I hadn't. And the other thing I want to mention is when I first got here, I always wanted to play that drug addict alcoholic card. You know, if I'd be one or the other, but I did not want to be both. I did not want to be a drug addict and an alcoholic. And so what happened in 1999, my husband had come home for the weekend, and I was very much the actress. I could clean up, the house would be perfect. I remember it vividly because our house was up for sale. We were supposed to be moving to Augusta, Georgia, and we had 2 small boys. They were 4 and 8. And he came home, and everything just was immaculate, and I cooked all weekend, and we had this beautiful weekend. And he left on a Sunday to go back to Augusta to work. And his mom and sister were coming. And at that time, I had a sister that I had always gotten high with. And I could vividly remember thinking, you know what? They talk too much. I am definitely going to get something to take the edge off. And I never had really gone to treatment. I would always go to outpatient treatments, and I'd say, well, I can't go to treatment. I have a job. And so what ended up happening is his mother and sister came, and I was in a total blackout, just in a total blackout. And so they called my same older sister to come over there. So by this time, the cops were there, and my older sister was there. And she called my husband and told him, Tom, there's a serious problem here. And he goes, well, Norma, he goes, something happened to the kids? What's wrong? He goes, she said, no, it's Kathy. She said, she's totally effed up. And he goes, well, God, that's just so hard for me to believe. He goes, she was perfectly fine when I left this morning. And that's how I always was. I could really, really go on stage, and I'd have this, this sweet little southern voice of bless your heart, and really make my husband believe I was doing the right thing. And so the cops were there. And I'm yelling at the cops, you donut-eating MFers, my husband's going to shoot you. You better get out of my house. And so my sister's got the phone in her hand, and she leans it over for my husband to hear, and she goes, now, Tom, she goes, does that sound like everything's okay here? And so I was strapped down. I went to the hospital, and then I ended up in the mental institution. In the mental institution, I was diagnosed with acute depression. I had in that period where I said I was 6 years sober, at 4 years, my oldest son was hurt by our dog. He was hurt really bad. You never know it today, but he had 350 stitches in his face. And when that happened, I knew that when things happen, that if you bring it to the rooms, there's always somebody that's been through something that you've been through. But I didn't do that. I kind of just went inside myself. And women were calling me. I made a lot of women friends in AA, and they were calling me, Kathy, don't you want to talk? Don't you want to go for coffee? And I was like, no, I'm good. I got this. And so I didn't drink right away, but 2 years later I did, and that's when I was put in the mental institution. And there I was diagnosed with depression and was put on a medication and went to treatment. And all those years that I had struggled, I finally, in treatment, the message was carried to me by, I had a wonderful therapist there. She was over 6 foot tall. She was adopted, and her name was Stanley. And she did not take any crap. And so she said to me, she goes, you know what? You're not Kathy. I'm an alcoholic. She goes, you have a voice, and you're going to start using it. And she said, your name's Kathy. You're not just Kathy, Tom's wife. She goes, you're Kathy. You're an alcoholic and drug addict, and you're responsible for your recovery. And that was a turning point in my recovery. That was a turning point. All those years I had kind of hung around, and I'd do a little bit of the work, but I hadn't truly surrendered. And the other thing is that I didn't realize, I didn't understand depression whatsoever, and I never even knew that I had depression. I knew that I just kind of wanted to get things done and take care of my kids and then just go home. And my idea of a depressed person was someone who cried all the time, and I really didn't do that, but I was kind of like in my own little world, and and just would kind of play the part of being Mrs. AA, sober wife in AA. And so in that treatment center, I went there in October, and we used to get those phone calls, and I'd say, when it would be my turn, I'd say to Tom, when this 28 days is up, I'm out of here. And I was pissed. And so what happened as time went on, something happened in that treatment center. And it got closer to that 28 days, and I started saying to Tom, can you see if my family can help you with the boys? They suggest that I stay, and I want to take their suggestion. I think I need to stay. And when I was in the mental institution, I want to go back and say this. When I was in the mental institution, I had an opportunity to go to this great women's treatment center. And I remember the lady was talking to me about it, and she goes, they have no beds, but somehow your husband pulled a string, and you're going to get in there. And I said, well, I can't go to treatment. And that's how I always was. Well, I've got a job. I've got 2 boys. I've got 2 little boys to take care of. And she said, you know what, Kathy? She goes, if you don't go do something about your disease, you'll be lucky to get to see those boys. And yeah, that was like, I started to know my husband, he wasn't playing anymore. He knew all my tricks. He really, by this time, he really, really knew me. So I stayed in that treatment center from October of 99 to February of 2000. And it was the greatest gift I could have ever given myself, because it gave me a tiny bit of a foundation. And when I got out, but they told me that I had to get a job and that it couldn't be anything to do with my sisters, because I had no idea who I was. I had always just done whatever I needed to do to get my drugs and alcohol. It didn't matter, if my sister my one sister had a house cleaning business, so I did that. Sometimes we waited tables, I did that. I used to sell drugs thinking that I was going to get to do mine for free. That never happened. I had my older sister that had shoved me into treatment had an alteration business, so I learned how to do alterations. And so what they told me there is, they said, do you even have any idea of who you are or what you like? And you know what? I didn't. I was clueless. I was such a broken woman, and just really, really lost. And so they told me I had to get a job. It didn't have anything to do with either of my sisters, and I did. And that having something, doing something, stepping that far out of the box, being willing to do something that I'd never done before. I remember I got an office job, and the lady that hired me was in Al-Anon, and she hired a lot of AA people. So she hires me as the receptionist, and I said to her, I said, well, I don't know anything about the computer. And she says, don't worry. She says, I'll teach you. And I have to tell you that when I started that job, I didn't even know which button turned the computer on. And I grew, I got promotions, my company sold, I went to work for a really great company. And my husband was one of those people also that did not believe in medication. That was back in the day when, if you took something for depression, that just was a big no-no in AA, because it was so many years ago. And so his insurance didn't pay, and my insurance that I had with this big company did. So I ended up weaning myself off my medication, and that was my last drunk. Also, it made a very big believer in to my husband that some people do need their medication. I can't tell you all the gifts AA has given me. I've done a lot of work in AA. I've done a lot of spiritual retreats that had nothing to do with AA, but the speaker might be an alcoholic. A lot of, back home they were called Matt Talbot retreats. I finally was willing to go to any length. And I started taking service commitments. Some of the stuff, I did one thing outside of AA that really just made me grow in AA like phenomenally. And what I found out is that even though that I was staying sober, and I wasn't experiencing, like, no one asked me to sponsor them or anything like that, and all of a sudden I stepped out of that box, and I realized I had a message to share that could help other women. I no longer felt sorry for myself about the terrible things that had happened to me as a child. I was taught to use those things that had happened to me as a child to help other women walk through, even though, like I wasn't a therapist or anything, but I could say, listen, you can get help for this, and you can get past it. Because for many years, I used a lot of those things. I used a lot of those things as excuses to get loaded. And I would get loaded over anything. Anything that happened to me, I got loaded over it. My sister that I partied with, I was 3 years sober. And Saturdays was my day. Saturday and Sunday I was off, so I would go do all my errands, do my women's meeting, and then go home and take a big nap, you know, because I'd worked hard all week. And this particular Saturday, I went home, and my brother-in-law was leaving me a voicemail, and I took my clothes off, got in my comfies, and went to lay down, and it was like, if everything in your life was wonderful and you were just filled with bright yellow sunshine, mine just went dark, just like that, listening to this voicemail because he couldn't get a hold of my sister. And I knew something wasn't right. I knew she wasn't okay. And so I started to go there, and as I was driving out of my develop, my husband showed up, and he goes, "Where are you going, honey?" And I said, "I really don't feel good about Camille." I said, "I want to get over there." And he goes, "Well, go back." He goes, "I'll go with you." And so we got over there, and I found a rusty key and got in her house, and she was a drug addict. She had gotten very addicted to prescription drugs because she had health issues. And when we got there, she was in respiratory failure. She lived 11 days on a ventilator, and then she passed. And that was my first big thing that I didn't try to. I felt what I was going through. I tried to comfort her children. I tried to comfort my brothers and sisters because we were all just like, oh my God. And how I describe how I feel about my disease is, I have a friend who, he's gone now, but he had a great saying. He used to say, just because the monkey's off your back don't mean the circus left town. And I always describe my disease as my sleeping tiger. And, you know, I've got him in the cage, but I have to do a lot of things to keep him in that cage. And that means, you know, it does mean praise, asking God to help me. It does mean, like, I gratitude with probably 20 women in the mornings, because they're, you know, I need to do that to my brain, because I have an alcoholic brain. I have a disease that's centered in my mind, and it talks to me in my own voice, and it always lies. And the biggest lie it's ever told me, and Jenna kind of touched on it, the biggest lie it's ever told me is, maybe I was just going through a phase. Maybe it'll be different now. Well, you know, it never was different. It was just, it was always the same. The only reason that I ever was able to put any of that time together was just because I put the cork in the bottle, because I didn't want my husband to take my kids away. That, and, you know, and AA started saving my life long before I surrendered. Because of the way my life was, you know, I was fortunate, I was blessed. And if you're here and you're new and you're young, you don't have to do all that. You just stay. You know, don't leave before the miracle happens, because the miracle does happen. And, you know, I have a great life today. I have a wonderful life. We moved here from Prescott 2 years ago. I finally got a job in April. And in September, October, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I know I will abuse anything. So I had to be on major pain medicine. And, you know, I know how, when I talk about keeping my sleeping tiger asleep, when I had to be on that pain medicine, I gave it to my husband because I knew I couldn't be trusted. How I describe that is that, yeah, it woke my sleeping tiger up. My head was going, well, God, is it time for that pill yet? But you know what? I was able to keep him in the cage. And, you know, as an older woman, I'm 60 years old. As an older woman, I know that health stuff comes up, and I like to touch on that when I share, because, you know what? It doesn't matter what it is for me. It doesn't matter if it's pills, if it's alcohol, if it's Coke. It doesn't matter what it is. I'll do anything to get to that place of dis-ease, to calm that dis-ease. And what I've found is that having being in AA, not being around AA, but being a card-carrying member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm able to keep that place on the inside of me that gets so diseased, at ease. And I can't do it without you guys. That's one other quick thing I want to touch on, is that it's a we program. And when I got here, I was very much just I. And the first step says we admitted. The other thing quickly I want to touch on is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And one of the things that can really get me screwed up is what comes after the dash. Because you know what? I'm an egotistical maniac. When life gets good and everything's wonderful and I'm really feeling good about my sobriety and it's just great, my ego says I did that. And then when the part after the dash is that I want to put everything in order because I think I know what I'm doing. And I don't know what I'm doing. That's why I need a power greater than myself. I need a power greater than myself, and sometimes I just need to pause. I just need to be still and know that I'm not God. And, that whatever it is if I take suggestions and I am open to doing whatever my sponsor says, and sometimes she has to say to me, okay, well, I think we better wrap this up now because I could, I still get really crazy on that trying to run my life. That's where my whole world changes, is when I'm able to say, to make that phone call rather than just, when something comes up, just making that quick decision or not running it by anybody. I have a huge group of women. I have plenty of women to run my stuff by. And that's what the we is about. That's what the we is about, because I don't know what I'm doing. I can't do this without you guys. You guys can do this without me, but I can't do this without you. And I'm very, very honored to get to speak here. I spoke here, God, I guess it's probably been a year. Well, it was before I had cancer. And it felt so good then. I was so happy when Kirk asked me, because you know what? Anytime I'm asked to take a commitment in AA, I just do it, because that's what I was taught. And I love you guys. Keep coming back, and don't leave before the miracle happens. Thank you.